So welcome to everyone who's here and, to those people who may be listening to this after the fact. My name is Catherine Chan. I'm the Operations and Strategic Relations Director at the Canadian Women's Chamber of Commerce. And today we have Ben Walter from Pocketed. Now Ben's a partnerships program manager. Pocketed, if you don't know, is a great Canadian startup led by two women. So we love to support Pocketed for multiple reasons, but they've been a partner of ours for a number of months now. And so we're very happy to welcome Ben today to give us a bit of an introduction and a 101 type to leveraging grants using the Pocketed platform specifically, but in general, very important for entrepreneurs. So take it away, Ben.
Catherine, thank you so much. And of course, thank you for inviting me here today to talk all about grant funding. Obviously, here at Pocketed, we love grant funding. We've grown our own business using grants, and we've seen so many other folks really leverage the power of grant funding in Canada as well. Obviously, very proud to be a partner of the Canadian Women's Chamber of Commerce. As Catherine mentioned, we were founded by two women entrepreneurs, Brandon Blaney and R.A. Hand, both very accomplished founders. Each of them had started their own businesses and scaled those businesses before coming together to actually first start Deep End, which was a business that I was working with them on. And then, of course, we made a pivot during the early stages of the pandemic to launch Pocketed. So I've been around and working with our founders, Brianna and Aria, since day one. I've really been able to see, the great growth of this company and obviously so many really terrific businesses come through and leverage the Pocketed platform to, of course, then leverage grant funding for their businesses. So I want to get us started with just a quick overview of the agenda today. I know for Sarah and Kathleen, you were on the call at the beginning. We were talking about kind of what the session will look like. Want to keep it very casual. We have a tight group here today. So as we're going through the content, just raise your hand or just unmute yourself and say, hey, Ben, I have a question at any point in time. If you do want to bring something up, we can talk through that. But this is how we're going to go through. So we're going to start off with the Canadian grant basics. So for folks who are just getting started or maybe applied to a few grants, but don't really know what is out there and what they can really be taking advantage of, that's where we're going to start. Then we're going to go through some really common grant misconceptions. So some things that we hear pretty often that just aren't true. I want to clear the air today. Then I'm going to give you some tips on preparing to apply and how to apply successfully. These are coming straight from a grant writer that we work with. He put together these slides, and so I'm going to be going through those with you, going over his best tips. Then we're going to look at Pocketed as a tool, a support tool that you can use to find grants and apply to grants. Then we're going to close out the session with some Q&A if we don't get to it during the content. So if there's anything that you're kind of holding on to, you don't want to bring up, as we're going through this, we'll have some time at the end as well. Now, whenever I start off these sessions talking about grant funding, I like to give a very quick overview just to run through the different types of funding you can take advantage of as a business owner. And I'm sure, all of you are familiar with these, even if you haven't used them in your own businesses, then definitely by name, and maybe some of your friends and your colleagues have used them in their businesses. But of course, we've got, debt financing through loans, got friends and family financing, crowdfunding, investor funding, angels, VCs, all fantastic ways to fund your businesses, right? All of them have their own unique pros. They have their own unique downsides. Of course, when we're looking at things like, loans, if we're getting a traditional business loan from a bank, we're gonna have to pay that back with interest. If we're looking at things like crowdfunding, then we're doing a lot of work to get our name out there and recognized and get those funds actually onto our crowdfunding campaign. But of course, we're focusing on grant funding, and grant funding is very different than the other four, funding sources that we're looking at on this list. And this will become apparent, as we go through the session today. But just right away, where we're on this slide, directly comparing it to, investor funding, crowdfunding, friends and family, and debt-based funding through loans, grant funding is going to be, non-repayable, so you don't have to pay it back, and you're not giving up any debt or equity to take that on. So really a great way to grow your business, and you can use it in tangent with any of the funding sources that are listed above it, or you can use it alone if you're just getting started with your business. Now, I have a question for you, okay? Maybe you didn't expect this, but yes, you're going to be answering questions as well. So who on the call here has used a grant before? I'd love to know. Drop it in the chat, just yes or no. If you have applied, you can even drop the name of that grant. Great. Catherine has. Sarah has not. Susan hasn't either. And Carol has not either. Great. Okay, perfect. So I love to hear this. Sometimes when I host these sessions, we have maybe a 50-50 split. Some folks have applied to maybe one grant before, or maybe two, but this is great. I'm glad to hear that we have some folks who are brand new to grant funding, and that gets me excited. Sometimes when we talk about grant funding in Canada, we talk about how it's really underutilized by those who can use it the most. And when you look at grant funding and you kind of look at the numbers and how quickly funding goes, it's not like grant funding is not being utilized. It is being utilized, but it's being utilized by companies that don't need it necessarily as much as maybe your companies do, right? Early stage, scaling small businesses that are really, growing local economies and the Canadian economy versus large multinationals that are taking advantage of this grant funding, kind of picking and choosing, right? So that's why I love to, host these sessions and, love doing the work that we do at Pocketed, because we can hopefully get some of that funding into your hands instead of those folks who don't need it necessarily as much. All right, great. So let's dive right into it. Let's start with the Canadian grants landscape, an overview of grant funding in Canada. So the first thing I want to do is to define what grants are. So on the screen here, I have a phrase, non-dilutive capital that helps you grow your business. So let's dig into what is non-dilutive capital. So when we talk about grant funding at Pocketed, we are going to categorize it under this category of non-dilutive. And for us, that is going to mean two things, right? That is going to mean non-equity, and that is going to mean non-debt. So non-dilutive for us is made up of these two components, non-equity and non-debt. So non-equity first means that you do not have to give up any ownership in your business to take on this outside funding, right? So equity is your ownership share in the business. If you're a sole founder, if you're an early stage business, you likely have 100% equity in your business. As you continue to bring on funding through maybe friends and family or investors or whatever that may be, you will begin to give up shares of your business, right? Shares of equity to bring on that funding and grow and scale. Now, as an early stage founder, we want to try to retain as much equity as we can for as long as we can. This is going to give us more control and ownership of our business and more leverage down the road as we are, beginning to seek out additional funding opportunities like VC and angel funding, right? If we own more of our business, we have much more leverage in that case. And of course, we want to own our businesses, right? So the first thing to know about grants is they are non-equity. So that just means you do not have to give up any ownership in your business to get that funding into your business, which is great. I love that. Now, the second piece is non-debt. So this is very simple. This means you do not have to pay these funds back to anybody. So the grant administrator who is giving you these funds, you do not owe them that money. So, we looked at the slide earlier, comparing it to things like traditional business loans through banks, some of these other sources that you do have to pay the funds back. You do not have to pay it back. You are not going to be charged interest on that loan. That's fantastic because it's not something looming over our head. We know once these funds are ours, they are ours to use on the projects we've secured them for. So that's kind of my long-winded definition of grants, but very important to know what are grants fundamentally. They are non-dilutive capital. Now, let's talk about how does grant funding actually work. So what is this process? And I really like to break it down into kind of 4 key steps. So step number 1 is going to be identifying a project in your business that you need funding for, right? So on the next slide, we're going to talk about what kind of projects you can fund. But whenever you're approaching grants, I always want you to start with the lens of what do I actually need funding for in my business? Is there a specific project? Is it, and I'll talk about the project in a second, but is it going to be like maybe a hiring opportunity or something like this that I need funding for? Now, once you identify that specific project, then that's when I want you to begin to seek out the grant program that's going to meet that need, right? So step 1, find a project in your business you need funding for, identify that project. Step 2 is going to be seeking out that grant. And so once we've already kind of narrowed down that list into what projects do I need funding for, that's going to make our grant search a lot easier since grants are categorized by project type. Now there's a step 2B, and step 2B is of course going to be applying and securing that grant. So once we find the grant, we are going to apply and secure it. Hopefully all goes well and we get that funding for our business. Now, step 3 is actually going to be project execution. And this one is an interesting one and sometimes contrary to what folks might think. Most grant programs in Canada are not going to give you a lump sum of cash up front to spend on the project. Instead, you are going to have dollars in your business already, so dollars in your pocket to execute the project, and then you're going to be reimbursed by the grant program. And typically this reimbursement is going to be anywhere between 50% to 100% of the project costs. Now, you are going to know how much coverage you are receiving in advance of applying and securing the funds. They are going to tell you this program covers 75% of project costs. It requires you to, allocate 25% of the costs. This program is going to, cover 100% of the costs. You will know that. But what you need to know is that the project costs are going to be paid out of pocket, and then the grant is going to reimburse you for those expenses. So depending on how expensive your project is, if it's maybe a $15,000 or $20,000 project just over a couple months, then in that case, you may have that cash readily available, right? If you don't have the cash readily available, this is when we do have to lean on these other sources of funding, right? Business loans, these types of things, to get that capital injection into our business so that we can execute the project. And luckily for you, there are specific grant-based financiers. So these are folks who provide you loans, short-term loans and financing based on the fact that you've been approved for a grant, and we have partners that can help you with that. But this is a very important thing to know. Project execution is going to happen on your dollar, and then you're going to be reimbursed. I see we have something in the chat. I'm just going to finish up with step 4, and then we'll get to that. So step 4 is obviously my favorite part, reimbursement. So this is when you're actually going to get those funds back into your bank account, and basically you've executed, XYZ project on 25% of the costs that you would have been incurring otherwise, right? Or 0% of the cost, or 50% of the cost. So 4 steps. First, project identification. Second, grant identification, and 2B, applying and securing the funds. 3, project execution, and then 4, reimbursement. All right, let's take a look here. Is that always the case, reimbursement? So Sarah, pretty much always it's going to be the case. There are like a select few programs here and there, not the big programs that will give you some cash up front. But yes, this is what the mindset you should have, is that with pretty much every single grant you apply to, all the big ones, all the ones that we typically talk about, they are going to be that reimbursement structure. All right, great. So what projects can you fund, right? If we're starting with project identification, what are we actually looking at? So there are 4 core categories of grants, 4 core categories of projects that you can apply for funding. So they're on the screen here: R&D, research and development, hiring, training, and then market expansion. Now, I also have COVID-19 recovery funding. That was a special 5th category of funding that was open, over the course of the past 2 years, a lot of wage subsidies, these types of things, help businesses get back on their feet. Most of these programs are closed out. I think there maybe is 1 or 2 that are maybe just trickling and just distributing funds, but this was a special 5th category that folks could be looking at. But really the 4 core categories are what you should keep in mind and should be looking for. So research development, hiring, training, market expansion. Each of these a little bit different. Obviously hiring, expanding your team. Training you can use to upskill existing employees on your team, or even in some cases your own skill set if you are a solo founder or something like this. Market expansion is for if you are growing into a new, typically a new international region, but some smaller market expansion programs help with new country-based expansion, so province to province, these types of things if you're expanding in those regions. And then, of course, research and development. If you're doing any sort of, technical development, research in Canada, these types of funds can help you sometimes fund, hiring for those types of projects. They can fund equipment costs if you're doing specific like development and building in Canada as well. So these are the 4 core categories. And I always say, start with identifying a project and kind of categorizing it into one of these. That's going to save you a ton of time down the road when you are actually looking for the grants to fit that project. So how much funding is available, right? What is out there? What is the opportunity here for us? What can you leverage? So 5.9 billion is going to be the number that we typically talk about for how much funding is available in Canada. And this is a really exciting number, right? That is a lot of funding that's available to us and that we can tap into. Um, you know, for example, here at Pocketed in our first year of business, we took advantage of $750,000 in grants. So, over $750,000 in grant funding, which is a massive amount of funds to come from a source that is, as you remember, non-dilutive, which is non-equity, non-debt, helped us grow tremendously, right? We were able to build our team, build our product, really get to market, most of which was funded by grants. And the nice thing about this 5.9 billion is this number fluctuates. So sometimes there's even more funding than this. Really depends on the federal government and provincial government budgets. But as a kind of a rough number that we typically talk about, we're going to be looking at that $5.9 billion in available funds. And I hope that gets you excited, because that's a good chunk of change to tap into. And when is the right time to apply for grants? I'd love to actually put this out to all of you. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the chat. I'll talk about my answer in a second, but when do you think it's the right time to be applying for grant funding? Kind of in your business journey, time of year, what do you think? When they're available, as soon as you have a project can be funded? Yeah. Yes, 100%. You're both right, Catherine and Sarah. You're both right. My answer is, if you need funding, it's time to look, right? There are grants pretty much available year round. There are definitely, hot seasons. Springtime is really great. There's a lot of programs that open up and are new around then. Same for kind of like end of the summer for winter hiring and winter projects. But if you need funding in your business, it's a great time to begin to look and see what's available to you, right? So it does not matter what company stage you're at. It could be pre-revenue, it could be Series D, it could be, well-funded. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. We've seen, all industries apply for grants, and all industries do sign up for Pocketed. And really the focus is, your projects and desired business outcomes, right? If you have a goal, if you have a project that needs to be funded, you should be looking for grants, and Pocketed is going to make that easy for you, right? Signing up and just seeing what's out there. And the other really nice thing is, as Catherine said, when grants are available. And so grants close and open throughout the year, but typically grants are going to be cyclical. So if you find a grant that you like and it's not open now, it likely will open again either later this year or the same time next year. So even if you're searching out funds and maybe you find a couple programs that look like a really good fit, but they're not open, now you know about them, and now you'll be ready to apply when they do open next year or later this year. So if you need funding, good time to look for grants. So now that we've kind of covered, all about grant funding, now we have a pretty good sense. This is a great opportunity for us to take advantage of. So I want to quickly talk about why folks maybe aren't taking advantage of it as much as they could be in their businesses. And so when we were launching Pocketed, we talked to thousands of our colleagues and co-founders and entrepreneurs across Canada, and really uncovered three key struggles. And the first one is that locating grants is challenging, right? So there are a lot of grants out there. It's over 1,000 programs available in Canada. Obviously, that makes up that 5.9 billion. And allocating the time to go and search through government websites and private websites and finding these programs, that's not necessarily what we want to be spending our time doing, as a founder, as a business owner, as an entrepreneur. And so locating the grants is time consuming and challenging, right? Finding what's out there, finding what's right for us. Now, the second piece is that once you find those grants, requirements can sometimes be tricky to navigate. And I always use MyTax as an example of this. I love MyTax funding. Obviously, we've used MyTax funding. We always push MyTax funding for folks, but MyTax funding in the website is sometimes really hard to figure out if you're actually eligible for the program. And you're going to have to go through a couple different links. You might have to go to their FAQ, click on some drop downs. And that's more time you're spending just to figure out if it's, the right fit for you. And MyTax is another good example that sometimes they really encourage you to kind of reach out to their team and talk about if it's the right fit. And so finding out and figuring out if your business is going to be the right fit for that grant, especially if you're brand new, can be tough. And then the third piece and the third challenge that really holds a lot of people back is that applications can be very time consuming, right? Writing out a grant application, summary of your business, intentions for the funds, basic business info, bit of a tongue twister there, I guess. That can take a lot of time. And especially if you're applying to a large volume of grants, if you wanted to apply maybe to one a month or one every couple of weeks or one every 2 months, again, that's time that we don't necessarily have and don't necessarily want to allocate, especially if it's our first time writing, second time writing, and we're still learning the process of how to curate that strong application. That's something that we don't necessarily need to be spending our time on, and it holds a lot of people back from getting started. And so, of course, that's why we launched Pocketed. So we launched Pocketed as a way to simplify access to government funding, right? We want to make sure that all of you are able to connect with the funds that you are eligible for and then have the tools that you need to go and apply to those funds successfully, right? So we're a refresh take on a really dated industry. The way it works is super simple, and we're going to dig into it later in the session. But first, create your account, build out a business profile, then you get matched with eligible funds, and then you're able to access the support to secure those funds. So we've helped over 9,000 businesses to date, secure grant funding across Canada and the US. And so we're super excited to be helping you as well. But before we get into the Pocketed platform, we're going to hop back over and we're going to go through some grant myths. Before I do that, I see a couple notes in the chat. All right, Sarah says, OMG, identifying grant eligibility. How do you find someone to answer questions where they don't have contact details and their requirements are unclear? For example, must have one employee, but also applies to sole practitioners. Yeah, that is a fantastic question, Sarah. So what I would say is if you're with Pocketed, you're at the right spot, right? When you sign up for Pocketed, we are going to have further grant details beyond what's available on the basic website of the grant program that you're looking at. And so you can visit us there on our, on our grant dashboard to find that grant and see what those requirements are. Of course, we also have our direct and live support. So if you ever have questions about specific opportunities or specific grants and those eligibility requirements, you can reach out to the Pocketed team, who is then going to be able to either tell you directly or with our own contacts, because we do have obviously some back-end network contacts at these organizations. We can reach out to them and clarify that for you. So as long as you're with Pocketed, as long as you know to reach out to us and you utilize our platform, you should be in a good spot as far as getting any questions answered. Great. Okay, so grant myths. Let's talk about it. So the first myth that we hear a lot is that there are too many strings attached, right? I'm going to be pulled in this direction, that direction. I can't take advantage of grants, don't want to. So we talked about it today. Yes, it's true. Of course, you got to report and get reimbursed by submitting those expenses. And that can be somewhat cumbersome, but there is a lot of flexibility when it comes to grant funding, right? So you have the flexibility in choosing the projects that you're working on in advance. You're not held accountable by investing third parties who are expecting that return on their capital. They want to see you performing with their capital and investing it in specific areas of your business. And then, of course, the third piece is that you're not obligated to spend all or any of the grant funding you secured if you don't have that applicable use. So, really good example of this is hiring funds. You can be approved for a hiring fund, and then if you don't find the right hire, you don't have to use that funding and you will not be penalized. You can apply again in the next cycle or whenever that may be right for you. So we have a lot of flexibility when it comes to working with grants, as long as you're applying for a specific project and you will have to report on the expenses incurred. Outside of that, we have a ton of flexibility choosing the projects we're working on, not held accountable by third parties who are pressuring us to spend on specific things or get a return on that investment. Now, the second myth that we hear a lot is that if I'm not in tech, there are no grants for me. This is just not true, right? There are so many different industries that there is specific funding for, from arts and media, agriculture, basically any industry, there will be grants available to you that are specific to your industry. But beyond this, what I always like to clarify is that you don't have to be a tech company to use tech funding. So, really good story. We actually had a taco food truck sign up for Pocketed, and they were able to secure and leverage a tech grant because of the website and marketplace that they were building out online, right? So you can have technical components to your business, even though if you're completely non-tech business, like a taco food truck, that is the most opposite of a tech business you could probably think of, other than maybe, I don't know, a garbage disposal company or something like that. But yeah, Catherine.
Yeah, so as an example, like the BDC had a women's venture fund that they launched a few years back, and they've just announced another one. There's a number of businesses there. They're not tech businesses at all, but they're tech enabled, and so they've managed to secure significant venture capital funding, right? So it's equity driven, but it's non-repayable. But because they're simply tech enabled, which is, it can be very helpful.
Yeah, that's a great story as well, and a great example. So don't be afraid. Like if you see a grant that at surface level looks like it's for a tech business, like don't be afraid to dig a little bit deeper, because a lot of the times there is a way you can leverage that if you're a tech enabled business. So just want you to know that as well. And then the third myth that we have is that when I apply, it doesn't impact my success. So this is not true. There are kind of two categories of grants. There are like non-competitive and then competitive programs. And with both, applying early can actually help improve your chances of securing the funds. So with non-competitive programs, this is going to be a pool of funding that as businesses apply, they're going to be approved on a rolling basis, and then funds will obviously reduce down until there's nothing left, right? So in this case, obviously applying early is going to impact your chances of securing those funds. There needs to be funds there for you to be approved and get those funds. Now, for competitive programs, typically people think, okay, great, it's a competitive program. There is a deadline on when applications are going to close. As long as I apply in advance of that, then it's going to be fair game, equal grounds for everybody. That's actually not the case. So CanExport is a competitive program. There's going to be one with a set deadline. They're going to be evaluating the projects against one another. But we actually learned with our obviously direct contact with the organization that only applications submitted in the first 2 weeks of the application period, and I think it was 2 application periods ago, were considered. So even though the application period was open for, I think it was 4-6 weeks or something like that, they were only considering those applications that were submitted in that first 2-week period. So this is really important for you to know, right? Because if you're looking at a grant and it says it closes on X date, you think you're okay if you apply maybe a couple days in advance of that. Always, this is our recommendation. Just get the application in as early as you can. Improve your chance of success. Not always are you going to know if they're going to be looking at it on a rolling basis or these types of things. So better for you to just get it in, especially if you're putting the work in advance, and improve that opportunity and chance to be funded. Catherine.
I'm on mute. That's crazy. I have never heard that before. So thank you so much for letting us know. Can I ask a question though, as kind of the flip side of that? I've also heard that I guess it's the federal government's fiscal year end. So, around the end of April, sometimes, even though you've applied at the end and you haven't really heard back, I guess sometimes because they have unspent funds right before their fiscal year end, you can suddenly sometimes get an email saying you're funded. Is that true as well?
That is true as well. Yeah, sorry, there's a fly flying around my head. That is true as well. So while I'm telling you right now to apply as early as you can, that does not mean don't apply if it's later in the period. So that's a great point. Thank you for bringing that up, Catherine, because even if you apply later and at first they say there's no more funds available, or right now we can't approve this project, a lot of the times out of the blue, as Catherine said, businesses will receive an email from that grant administrator and say, your project has been approved, the funding is yours. And this can be weeks, this can be months later, totally at random. We've had a lot of pocketed users come to us before. We've helped them curate their applications. We've applied. Unfortunately, funding has run dry. And they email us 3 months later, pocketed. We just got an email saying we're approved for the grant. And we're like, fantastic. Like, that is great news, right? Obviously, that's what we want. So yes, thank you for bringing that up, because it's a really good time to kind of talk about that. So even though I'm telling you right now, apply early, that still matters. If you aren't applying early, you can't, capacity, you maybe find the program after X days, still apply. Can always work out for you. Okay, great. So the last piece that I'm going to talk about here today is just going to be a couple tips on securing funds. And of course, as I said, these are some slides that were prepped by one of our lovely grant writers. So coming straight from the professionals. So the first piece about really being successful with grants is going to be eligibility and preparedness, right? So two pieces here. So the first thing is, basic eligibility is really important to get out of the way, right? You need to know who your business is, and then you need to know what the program is looking for. So eligibility requirements, as it says here on the slide, can be around the business owners, and the project activities. And again, as we talked about earlier, if you are, not a tech business, but you want to use tech funding, you can be creative and you can make yourself more eligible than you may think. So eligibility really comes down to, a lot of different things. It can come down to, company size, come down to, founder demographics. It can come down to, the industry that you're working in. But a lot of the time, after we move past the very basic eligibility, the things that can't be changed, the things that can't be built upon, there are some ways that you can maybe focus your project or focus, your business goals that will meet that eligibility of the specific grant you are applying to. So that's number one. And the nice thing is with Pocketed, when you build your business profile, we take care of the basic eligibility for you. So you only have to worry about that more creative and positioning type eligibility. Now, the second piece is, of course, making sure that you are very prepared in advance so that when you get to that stage where you're ready to apply and you find a program, you can move very quickly through that. So a couple things to keep in mind, right? Timelines, common requirements, frequently asked questions for these grants. I'm going to show you actually right now the basic business info that you should always have on hand to make sure that you are prepared so that you can move through that application period process very quickly. So pretty much every single grant that you apply to is going to want the following. It's going to want a business number, so CRA business number, company description, kind of a brief sales pitch, company address, contact info, corporation date. This is all so simple, right? We're looking at this, we're like, okay, obviously I have that information. Obviously you have this information, but what I always say is make centralized documentation for your grant funding documentation, have this info there at the top. And then as you go through applications, whether it's yourself or somebody on your team, refer to that doc, pull that info in really quickly, get it in there, apply to the grant. And as you're applying to more and more grants and you kind of find your language that you like to use, you can add that to this document. So now you have a really, really solid grant funding, SOP that you or anybody else on your team can go back to and refer to and use to make future applications easier and more successful. Catherine, so you got your hand up?
Yes. So I just wanted to kind of comment on your previous slide where you said be creative. And it kind of brought to mind something that I think a lot of folks don't really kind of connect the dots. So oftentimes people are like, okay, I have a project or a business that needs funding and they go looking for the grant for it. But then sometimes there's like the big grants, like the WAS grant, right? That there was another infusion of cash and the deadline was the end of September. Now, there's a lot of people that didn't have a project that necessarily fit into that, for those who don't know, I'm also an entrepreneur in my own right. I have a software platform called Fit-In. And so for that, like I applied for that grant, but what I did was I actually tailor-made a project that is not directly applicable to the software, but it's kind of like almost a side project that supports the business and supports growth. So I almost created the project around the grant itself to be applicable for it. Yeah, to be, so I was applicable for it. And that's one strategy that I've heard now that I've done it myself. I'm hearing all these other women who have done that as well. And it could be a good way. And especially those big ones, those ones are tranche style. They're not reimbursement style. So you would get some funding up front, you would get funding at year, 1, 2, 3, or whatever it is. So that's one way when you do see a grant that gives you funds up front, you can kind of take advantage by trying to, figure out being creative, essentially, which I love.
Yeah, definitely do that. What a wonderful story. I'm glad that worked out for you. And that's exactly what we're saying, right? Like pitch yourself, like do what you need to do to get these funds in your business. It's competitive out there and we want you to be successful. So, if you need to tailor the messaging, tailor the story, create a project, you should do that. And you should feel confident in doing that as well. Okay, great. So couple slides here really quickly, and then I'm going to show you the Pocket platform that we can take any last questions. So top tips, this is coming again from Aditya, prepare in advance, So we already kind of went through that. Check eligibility, check deadlines, have that basic business info ready to go so you can go through that process super quickly. Just as Catherine was talking about, shape your project, create a project if you need to, and then finally determine if you need that professional assistance. So if you do need some help crafting the messaging, if you do need some help, just if you don't have the time capacity, that's a good time to, reach out for somebody to help you write the grant as well. All fair and reasonable expectations and reasons to work with a grant writer. Time matters. We talked about this a lot today. So apply as soon as possible. Ongoing, applications and rolling applications, applying early matters. And even when you think it might not matter, it might. So just, do yourself a favor, apply early. Number 3, writing matters. Adichie always says, when we do like kind of our grant writing workshop, this is effectively his grant writing workshop, because he says writing a grant, like it's about, you have to be a strong writer. It's you can't teach somebody how to be a strong writer in, an hour or 2 hours or anything like that. And so that's fine, because you practice and you write more and more, your writing will improve. But most people, write it for, a minimum college level essay or newspaper article quality. That's what Adichie always liked to say. Keep professional, use appropriate language. Another thing that's really, key here is if there's a lot of, if there are technical terms that the grant is using in the listing, use that in your application, right? Kind of like what they say with job applications, like they're like, oh, put all the keywords in at the bottom of your resume and then like white them out, something like that. I'm not recommending you do that. It's not, but what I do recommend is that with grant applications, definitely use some of those key terminology, and keywords in the application. It's going to make it look like your project really fits, and it'll allow it to be easier to say yes on approval, right? Write concisely, and if you need our grant writer to help you with that. Tip number 4, the project funding ask really matters. So, as Catherine was sharing, you can work around this, because if they're asking for a specific project, you can make a project that fits that. But you need to be aware of this, demonstrating that the project that you are pitching for meets the goals of that grant when what they're looking for is crucial, right? If you are applying for a specific, application or specific grant that is talking about a specific type of project goals, maybe it's like sustainable economic goals or something like this. If you're applying and your project doesn't meet that, you're not going to be approved. So just make sure it fits, right? And the last thing, think like the funder, right? Adichie says, if you were reviewing 100 applications, how good would yours be, right? This is, again, it's competition. Sell yourself, be confident in the project you're working on, be confident in the business you're building, reflect that in the application. And of course, just like anything else in life, that is going to help you increase your chance of success. So those are kind of the 5 key tips from Adichie, our grant writer. And the last thing that he always likes to share is like when to engage a writer. I'm just going to run through this really quickly. Short on time, need professional expertise, need strategic planning. So if you're brand new to the process, if you are not brand new to the process, but you don't have the time to allocate to the process, that's a good time to engage a writer. Yeah, Catherine, please. Oh, sorry, you're on mute again.
I'm on mute again, right? Yeah, I hope you don't mind all the questions, but
Not
can
at
you
all.
just maybe talk a little bit about the ins and outs of hiring a grant writer? I've talked to a few, but my understanding is that, no matter how you pay them, whether it's contingency or just fee, that cannot be part of the grant application itself, that it has to be completely separate. Is that correct in all cases?
So that is correct in 99.9% of cases. I've seen like maybe 1 or 2 grants before that allows you to write in the grant writing costs. But yes, you are correct. The structure is going to be that you're paying the grant writer separately out of pocket. It's not going to be part of that 10, 20, 50, $100,000 that you're securing. The grants that do allow you to write it in are some of the really, really big ones. In that case, usually the applicant or the administrators recognize that it takes a lot of work to put together these really lengthy project proposals. And so in that case, they recognize you may be using one. And so in that case, yes, but all the other cases, you're going to have to pay for that out of pocket separately.
Do you have a, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say fee structure. Typically, pretty much all the grant writers that we work with through Pocketed and we connect you with are going to be a contingency fee structure. So they'll write the grant for you, no charge up front. Only if you're successful in securing the funds, then you pay a percentage fee, almost like a commission on that grant. So that's what a lot of our, out of house grant writers that we work with in our network charge. And then we also in-house offer some lower cost options that are like a set fee. So we'll say like it's, X $100 or something like that. That's like, you have to pay it, but it's more cost effective, or it's more affordable than working on the contingency fee, which is typically a larger sum. Just, you might not have to pay it, but if you do, it's going to be a lot more money.
What's the standard kind of contingency fee that you see? Is it like 15%, 30%?
20% is going to be the typical contingency fee that we see. I don't know of anybody in our network that charges more than that. 20%, if you're somewhere in that ballpark, you're at the right spot.
Okay, great. And what do you have a sense of, like, so if you did invest, say, in a grant writer, what's the differential between like getting the grant, doing on your own, and getting a grant using a grant writer who knows the process, who knows how to write them for success? Like, do you have a sense of how much it helps?
Yeah, so kind of a tough question to answer. I'll tell you why, but I can right away say, like, from the stats that we do know, if you're taking like a kind of an intro, hasn't really applied to grants before, we typically see 3 times more success with a professional grant writer, which is great. But there are a lot of variables to that, because, like, for one example, if you don't have the time to write the grants, then you have 100% more success chance with a grant writer, right? Or if you're brand new versus a very experienced person, then that's going to be a little bit different, right? But if we're looking at someone who's maybe relatively new to grant funding, doesn't necessarily have the time, then you're going to see about that increase in success with grants. Cool. Okay, so I know we just actually hit our 1:45 timeline, which I thought we'd be done by now, but clearly it's been a good session. That's good questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly show you all the Pocket platform, just so you have like a very basic understanding of what it looks like. And then if we have any other follow-up questions, we can address that. So I have a code here on the screen as well, CANWCC. That is going to get you completely free access to our basic tier of Pocketed. So Pocketed, the basic version is $30 a month, roughly, to sign up. The special code here offered through Canadian Women's Chamber of Commerce gets you completely free access forever. So please use the code when you sign up, so you're not paying for anything when you sign up. If you want to upgrade to our Pocket Plus version, and I'll kind of show you what that looks like, the code's going to get you a discount. It's going to get you 25% discount if you do choose to upgrade to a higher tier of the Pocketed platform. But definitely use the code when you are signing up, so that, oops, sorry, stop that share for a second, so you can get free access. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop the platform on the screen. And while I'm doing that, I'm also going to pop this link in the chat. That link is yes, Carol. If you sign up for free now, you can upgrade later, and you can use the code then. So if you visit the link that I just shared in the chat, that's going to take you directly to the sign up page, and the code will already be in the referral code field. So that'll be easy for you. You don't have to worry about pasting it in. So as I was talking about earlier, the way that Pocketed works is when you sign up, the first thing you're going to do is build a business profile. So you're going to fill in all the basic business details, company size, revenue, industry, these types of things. And that is going, oh, great, Carol. Yeah, nice. Thank you. That's perfect. That was quick work. So once you fill out that business profile, all the basic eligibility about your business, when you sign in for the first time, you're going to see grants that are specifically matched to you. So the way that our platform works is in the back end, we're going to take a look at everything that you filled in on the business profile, and then we're going to match you with eligible grant funding opportunities. So this is the homepage. Obviously, a couple things going on here. For the sake of today's presentation, I'm going to take you straight to your grants dashboard. This is where you're going to see all of the programs you've matched with, and then you can filter those programs down to find ones that work best for you. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go into Explore Funding, and this is where we're going to see all of these programs. Now, for me, I have kind of a test account. So I have literally every single program on here. This is not what yours is going to look like. Yours is likely going to be maybe 100 programs, 110, 120, somewhere in that ballpark. Some people get a little bit less, some people get a little bit more, but these are going to be programs that are eligible based on your business profile that you've created. So we can go through this list, and right away we can just start to click in and explore these programs, right? So we'll go in, we'll see how much funding it is, who it's being provided by, and we can click a drop down, see a very brief description. And then if we come down here, we're going to see company requirements, application requirements, and deadline. It's pretty much, the basics we need to know to feel confident to apply. There are a couple other things that we're going to have on this screen here. Pocketed Grant Intelligence, as well as grant-specific resources, are actually going to be part of that Pocketed Plus tier. So this is going to be that upgraded version of the platform. It's going to be one tier up from the basic. The basic version of the platform, you're going to get everything that you see on the screen right now, except for this will be grayed out and this will be grayed out. So other than that, you'll see all the requirements of the grant. You'll see a description. You'll see the funding amount. And you'll be able to search through all these different opportunities. Now, a couple things we can do from within the actual grants themselves. We can apply now. So we can go ahead, click that button, get out to the application portal and submit an application on our own, or we can hire a grant writer. So super simple. That'll connect you with our team. We'll get you in touch with a grant writer. We can also share this grant out with some friends or colleagues, and we can save it for later. Now, the saving for later really comes into effect once we begin to do filtered searches. So we can search by name at the top here, but obviously if you don't know what you're looking for, can't search by name. So right here beside that, we've got a couple of drop-down filter menus that you can use to narrow this list down. So for example, I want funding for, this is going to be a very intuitive, self-serve filtering opportunity. I want funding for sustainability, maybe environmental sustainable projects. Everyone understands that. You can just click on that easily, and we have a reduced list of 190. So we went from over 1,000 programs to 190 programs. That's already much more digestible, right? And we know it's specifically focused on environmental sustainability projects. Now, where we can actually kind of pick and choose is if we go into the More Filters tab. So we go into the More Filters tab. This is where we can actually pick and choose the different types of things that we want to see reflected in this list of grants. So let's just do for an example. So we're starting off with over 1,000 programs. I only want to see open grants. I only want to see grant opportunities, not tax credit or competitions. I'm looking to hire, and I'm looking to hire somebody in the category of over 50. With these 4 simple filters, in less than a minute, we've gone from 1,000 something programs to 56 programs, right? Much easier for me to look through this list. I know it's going to be focused in on my business and my project, spend a little bit of time searching through, reading about the different programs. And then when I find one that I like, I can save that for later and check it out right over here. Now we can go even deeper than this. There's more filters there for you. But this is kind of a good example of how you can use that to find the program that's going to be best fit. So that's kind of a very basic overview. A lot more we can do in Pocketed. Obviously, we can make edits to our profile. We can check out saved grants for later. We can track kind of our application process here. And then we've got a ton of resources. So lots for you to poke around in. But I'm going to kind of leave it at just the basics today on how to sign in and obviously check out those grants that you've matched with. I think there's something in the chat here. Oh, great. A comment from you, Catherine. I'll just leave that for a second while I get the slides loaded back up. So since we've gone a little bit over my promised end time, thanks everyone for sticking around. It means that it was worth your time. I just want to thank all of you for joining today. Obviously, Catherine, thank you so much for inviting me here today to speak about grant funding and Pocketed. Again, super, super proud to be a partner of the Canadian Women's Chamber of Commerce, and excited to welcome all of you to the Pocketed platform very soon, and of course to secure your very first grant. So thank you so much, everyone. If there's more questions, I'll stick around, and you can always reach out to us at hello@hellopocketed.io.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ben. Like, this is just so much better than, 5 years ago when I was first starting out. I had to have like a whole Trello board to keep track of all the grants out there. And this is like so much easier. You don't need a Trello board anymore. We've got Pocketed. So thank you for sharing the wisdom. Hopefully we'll have you back and maybe have one of your colleagues do a grant writing session for us or something. But to everyone who joined, Carol, Sarah, Kathleen, and Susan, thank you so much. And hopefully we'll see you next time.